Welcome to our Yin Yoga workshop. In day one, we're going to focus on the lower body, and in our limbs of yoga, we're going to focus on asana and touch a little bit on pranayama. Asana is our seat, our pose, and it's really important that when we are practicing yoga, we're able to find stillness and ease when we are in these poses. And this touching in on pranayama helps us to feel our breath, helps us to give our mind something to focus on. Day two is going to be focusing on our upper body and really getting into a lot of breath practices, a lot of pranayama, and then moving into our fifth limb of yoga, which is pratyahara. So our senses tend to be reaching out. We're listening for sounds, we're noticing cats, we're being pulled in a million different directions all the time, especially when we take this time to sit. Day three is going to be a full body yin sequence, moving from the top of the body to the bottom of the body. And we're going to be focusing on samyama, the last three limbs of yoga. Now, these are usually taught together because each one is a progression of the one that comes before. For the rest of this introduction, I'm going to go a little deeper into the Yoga Sutras. If you'd like to just go ahead and get started with our disciplines, you can jump right into day one. Otherwise, we'll keep going a little bit deeper. One of the traditions of the sutras that I really appreciated in my studies was that usually an opening sutra is offering up whatever teachings are coming to something higher than ourselves. And this whole idea was that as the teacher, I only have a certain understanding, and as someone who is reading the sutras, I hope that my ignorance doesn't misinterpret or doesn't hold back the true teaching that is trying to be conveyed through these words. So right now, I would like to just offer up that this is my current understanding after my years of study of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. And they may change. You might ask me 3 years from now and I might have a different opinion on them. And that's what's so interesting, I think, about a lot of these traditional texts, is that they are designed to be reinterpreted. They are designed to be revisited, to change for the time and place in which they are being taught. The word sutra actually means a very concise phrase that is representative of a much bigger idea. And then each sutra is supposed to be unpacked by a teacher. And so I'm going to just do a little bit of unpacking for you with my studies of the sutras that came before Patanjali's 8 limbs. Something that I found helpful in studying Patanjali was knowing that he came from the Sankhya school of metaphysics, this concept of prakriti and purusa. So prakriti is the reality in which we find ourselves. Purusa is the consciousness, the awareness that is experiencing that reality. And this is broken down a little bit more in Prakriti to the 5 senses, or the 5 consciousnesses of our senses. That's not only the senses themselves, but also the organs that allow us to experience these things. And I like to, in a modern way, equate this to our mouse and keyboard with our computer. It's our input. It's how this reality inputs into our manas, our mind. So this is the next part of Prakriti. We have the chitta. A lot of us have heard of chitta vritti. So the chitta is made up of manas, the mind, which I like to equate to the processor. So the mouse and keyboard input in the information from the outside, the sound comes in, our sight comes in, a smell comes in, and then that's sent to the processor, the manas, the mind, that then categorizes, and the processor is able to go, okay, this many ones and this many zeros means this. Now, the mind, the processor, then compares that information to the ahankara, the long-term memory, the seat of the ego, the seat of our identity of self. We have all of these experiences throughout our life that give us an idea of self. And so just like the computer, when we input something in, it processes that information and then it goes into our hard drive and it sees what those ones and zeros equates to. And then we have buddhi, the intelligence. And I like to think of this like the software that then puts something on a screen. This has also been described as the part of the mind that makes some kind of sense of, okay, I've been given this information of a red rose, and I then compare that to my memory banks, and have I ever run into a rose before? Yes, I have. Is it dangerous? I don't know. Does it smell good? Probably. And so we're able to compare that to something and make a mold of some kind that we then present. Now, in the yoga tradition, we have an id, an Übermensch, the soul, if you want to call it that. In yoga, in the Sankhya tradition, it's called Purusa. And this is our basic awareness. So in the computer analogy, this would be like the user. And our buddhi, our intellect, is like the software and the screen that is presenting this information to us to the best of its ability. The prescription of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras is for when we become misidentified with Prakriti, with our computer. We start to think that we are the mind. We start to think that we are all of these processes that are going on all the time, and we get caught in this loop of constantly trying to figure out what this computer is. And we've lost our identification with being the user, with being the experiencer, with being the one who is on the other side of the screen. So once we found ourselves identified with this process of life, we'll usually find that there's a lot going on, right? We have viruses that are coming in, and maybe our hard drive is running out of space, and there's always all these issues with our computer. And how do we start to sift through and look through this whole experience and hopefully get the computer running well, and so that we can no longer be trapped inside of it? And that is where yoga comes in. That's where these limbs of yoga give us a manual to start to go through and look under the rug of all those things that we've been pushing off until later, and start to clean them out and see what's going on and to see what it is that we have to work with. The limbs of yoga are referred to all the way back in the Upanishads that predate Patanjali by a couple of thousand years. The Upanishads were some of the first written teachings that were starting to take us away from these sacrificial rites in our history and actually learn how to start to control some of this chaotic chitta vritti, this mind that's just jumping around to every new stimulant. In the Maitreya Upanishads, there are 6 limbs of yoga that are presented. I found these very interesting because they're really similar to Patanjali's limbs. The only difference is that Patanjali added in the yamas and the niyamas, as well as asana, and then he took out tarka. And in my research, the closest I could find to modern day would be analytical meditation. And analytical meditation is great if it is taught really well. But a lot of times our modern analytical mind gets so caught up in the analysis that it gets lost there. So maybe let's take out the worry about the analysis and let's focus instead on where we are, on the position of the body, and notice how our place, our seat, can pull us away so easily. Over the next 3 days, we're going to be spending time with the last 6 limbs of Patanjali's 8 limbs of yoga. The reason I decided to do this is because the yamas and the niyamas, the first 2 limbs, these are how we interact with the world off of our mat when we're not sitting in meditation or in our yoga practice. Yin Yoga is all about our ability to relax and release into these poses. And this is the same with Patanjali's 8 limbs of yoga. We have to be able to surrender into these experiences. What I'm referring to here is the idea that we hold our disciplines like we would an egg. Too hard and we crush it. Too soft and we drop it. So I thought the two of them really went well together. I think an important concept that was told to me a couple of years ago that really helps my understanding of yoga and of these practices that we do is that these are all prescriptions, not descriptions of how things are. But since we have this overactive mind, these are all ways, these are all practices that we can use to help to settle our mind out, help to bring our stress levels down, and to help us actually perceive our world correctly, instead of with all of these ideas and all of these projections that we put out. Now I want to talk a little bit about the yamas and the niyamas, the first 2 limbs of yoga, since we're not going to be touching on these in the next 3 days. When I first heard the yamas and the niyamas, they sounded a lot like religious text to me, because I grew up Christian, and these are really similar to the Ten Commandments. But something that I did appreciate in the Yoga Sutras is that Patanjali talks about these levels of extremism when we're going through our practice, where we decide how our balance works with these commitments. So you will have to discover for yourself what the yamas and the niyamas mean for you, and what the practices mean for you off of your mat and in your own life. So our first group will probably sound pretty familiar. We have nonviolence, don't steal, don't lie, don't hoard and take more than your fair share, and the always controversial celibacy. Now with each of these, you will have to decide what level works for you. So in nonviolence, we can go as far as some of the Jain ascetics who will sweep the path in front of them to make sure that they don't step on any little small creatures, and they don't eat vegetables because when you pull the vegetable out of the ground, it kills all the little microscopic creatures that are living around it. And some of them go as far as to starve themselves because eating anything is killing some kind of life form. And then brahmacharya, celibacy, always has a lot of interesting conversation around it, and it's definitely one that you will have to explore to find balance for yourself. I can attest, having spent 2 years in celibacy, I was on a path where I thought I was going to become a monk, and then I met my now domestic partner, and that all went out the window. But those 2 years that I was celibate, I had so much more energy and so much more time to focus on other things. I accomplished so much in those 2 years. So there's definitely something that can be said for how much time we do spend thinking about sex, pursuing sex, how it's such a huge part of our modern culture. And do we really want to spend so much of our life, so much of this human existence focused on just sex? Our other group are how we work on ourselves. And these are things as simple as cleanliness, contentment, austerity, sometimes translated as determination, study, and surrender to something higher than ourselves. I want to talk a little bit about this determination in our practice. If it wasn't for all the frustrations, all the stresses, all these things that we think are bad, we wouldn't have any reason to practice. If everything was hunky-dory all the time, then there'd be no reason for us to have any disciplines. And so this determination is important. This determination is what gives us the drive to move through our yoga practice. Over the years, I feel like I have tried to give fair warning that this path is hard. It is the hardest thing you can possibly think of because it is rewiring your mind. So anything that you can think of, you will have to deal with. You will have to go through. You will have to make part of your practice. So it's supposed to be challenging. It's supposed to push us. So that drive is important. And so is study. And this is not only self-study, but it's also studying writings, studying by listening to videos like this, studying for yourself so that you can come to your own conclusions. And the last one that I want to talk about is surrender. If we are unable to surrender to someone, something, anything outside of ourselves, then we're not able to learn. We're not able to grow. If we think we already know everything, then we're a cup that's already filled, and it can't be filled anymore. That emptiness is important. So I encourage you to find something that you can surrender to, whatever that means to you. One of my favorite analogies for the yamas and the niyamas is that of being a gardener. As gardeners, we have to tend our garden and notice when the weeds pop up. Notice when the plants need a little more fertilizer, a little more water, a little more sunlight. And that is our job. That is our practice. That is our discipline. To be the caretaker. To be a gardener. Before I go, I want to talk a little bit about Samadhi. I think it's really important to state that there are dozens of types of Samadhi. And this doesn't mean enlightenment. I think a lot of times we equate Samadhi with enlightenment. The best way that I like to explain Samadhi is, of course, with a story, as most of these ideas are best explained by a story. But this story takes a little while, so I'll at least let you look at this tree that I drew while I tell you a story about a tree. Sometimes Samadhi is equated to a tree. Now a tree is the idea of being present, being aware and awake to our own lives. Now we can come up to this tree and we can touch the tree and we are present, we are here. Then we start to go on the path of our life, and we start to wonder what else there might be besides just touching the tree. And then usually life happens and we get distracted and we get pulled into a million different things. But then we run into someone, sometimes this is called our Diksha Guru, the first consciousness that we run into, that lets us know that we can be present and awake to this life. And so we start doing our practices and we start climbing the tree, so to speak. And as we're climbing the tree, our cell phone falls out of our pocket. And usually there's somebody on the tree, and this might be a mentor or a teacher, and these are sometimes called our Shiksha Gurus. And they say, hey, don't worry about it. You don't really need your cell phone. And we go, okay, sure, yeah, I'll just keep climbing up the tree. I'm sure everything will be fine. And then our job falls away, and then our relationships fall away and start to change, and we find ourselves in this swirl of change, and we keep thinking, okay, maybe something will get solid and make a little more sense at some point. But then we start to realize that it's the dissolve itself that we've been looking for. It's the dissolve that is Samadhi. It's the path. But then we start to hear the suffering of this world. This might come in a myriad of different forms, but something helps us to look outside of ourselves. And as we pull back, we realize that we have something to offer. We may have something to teach. We may have something to give. We may have something to live. And as we pull back, we realize that we're still just looking at a tree, but the tree is a little different. There's something else to it that wasn't there before. One of the greatest teachings that I have come across in all of these different traditions is that one need not intellectualize all of these practices and disciplines and concepts. One needs to actually have personal experience of these things. So over the next 3 days, I hope that you will explore. I hope that you will find your personal experience. I hope that you will find your path, your practice, your discipline, and your own peace and equanimity in the ups and downs of this crazy world. I want to say thank you to all of our amazing donors at patreon.com/freeyoga who have decided to give a little something every month so that we can continue to make these classes and to make all of this accessible to all of you. If you'd like to give a little something, there's also a donation link in the description below, or you can join us as one of our patrons at Patreon. These classes wouldn't be possible without all of your incredible support. So thank you so much. I look forward to continuing on with all of you.